Cool. Alrighty, welcome everyone to the very first Slack platform community event. We're really excited to have you here. We just kicked this off in San Francisco. Great to see this turnout. We've got a full show tonight with a whole bunch of speakers that I think you guys will get really excited about. I want to give a special shout out and thanks to Slack for helping host tonight. They generously put together some food, gave us a space, which is really, really nice of them. And of course, you'll see that some of the Slack team members came up and are going to talk tonight. So thank you for that. And then volunteers too, if you can kind of raise your hands, there's a handful of you. We've got some great volunteers supporting tonight's event. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to them. Bathroom, questions about the community, all the other fun stuff there. And then a quick introduction. I'll kind of kick off. Ray and I started this not too long ago. My background, I run a small startup called Revere. We were really early on to kind of the Slack platform, building Slack applications for our customer base. It helped us really grow quickly, especially through a lot of visibility inside the marketplace. And that's kind of one of the reasons I started getting involved.
I'm Ria. I'm a co-founder at Toast. I'm basically my day-to-day is like engineering, design, product work, speaking to other engineering leaders. What we built at Toast is an in Slack collaboration for GitHub, basically. That means you get notifications on your pull requests. For anyone here who is a developer, you know how important that is. That makes collaboration possible. And we've basically made it just super powered with Slack. And I also wanted to take this time to get to know the audience a little bit as well. So anyone here has built a Slack app before? Cool. Anyone here is thinking about building a Slack app? Great. Anyone doesn't know what to do for Slack apps? Okay, cool. No, it's really great. This should be really fun. We'll hear a lot from these speakers today to learn how to get that process moving.
Cool. That's a great segue too about what are we even doing here, right? What is this Slack platform community? This is something that recently just started off. This is a global network. We have chapters all over the world. The main focus really is around supporting thinking, building community around people that work in Slack, leverage Slack, especially applications inside of their marketplace. And so I think it's really exciting to be able to sit there and talk with other people that sit there and find ways to leverage Slack using different applications inside of their company or build on top of that and sell that out as kind of supplemental companies. The way we're doing this right now is you'll see we'll have a series of events over the course of the year. We'll have meetups and we'll have online resources. After this, you all get emails kind of with some of these resources and kind of tips and tricks and all of the speaker notes from this evening. Through that, we'll also have partner discounts and some other things available to us. This is all free and volunteer based and just something that we try to do to kind of build this community inside of San Francisco. Sweet. Why in the first place, right? We all know this. Stats are on the screen. Slack is expanding rapidly, as everybody already knows. The rise of application development inside of the marketplace is just continuing to expand and really bloom. So in that maturity, everybody's sitting here and trying to find ways to best leverage the tools that they're building or how to use these tools inside of their company. And last call for this too is this is our first event. We want to hear and see what you guys want, what you're looking for, what information would be most useful for you inside of your day-to-day. Reach out to us. We're always looking for volunteers and speakers. We always want feedback from all of you to understand kind of how we can kind of best build programming. Also sponsorship too. We're going to continue to find new events and kind of change venues and speakers. So that's always something that's going to help us drive and get to that finished state. Sweet. Cool. Coming up, a little bit of a shout out for some housekeeping. There's a couple key things coming up. We'll have another event coming in September. The date's still TBD. It's going to be kind of aligned up with Bot Week. This will be something similar to this event. People come in, we'll have a series of speakers, etc. Shout out in October, we'll have Spec. How many of you guys are signed up for Spec right now? Okay. Yeah, we got a third of the audience or so. We have a discount promo code. We'll make sure we send this out so you don't have to furiously write this down. It's still early bird pricing right now, which is really great. That's going to be fun over the course of 2 days in San Francisco. We're going to align some type of happy hour community event during that period of time, just so we can all kind of see each other and get to know each other. So that's cool. And we'll continue to build this calendar and share that out.
Okay, so very exciting series of speakers tonight. We have Justin from Rigdy. We have Doug from Treehopper, David and Shane from Slack as well. So something to look forward to. And if you are using Twitter, make sure you use this hashtag so that we can see your tweets coming in and then we can see what you think. Okay, so let's have the first speaker come up. Justin. You go, Justin.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. I usually like to wander around, so just somebody waving me or something if I'm like away from the mic and you can't hear me. All right, so my name is Justin. I'm the founder of Rigdy. And I'm going to talk kind of about some quick tips we learned, painfully in some cases, in our 2 years or so we've been building a Slack app. Real quick first, Rigdy is a DevOps and incident command center for Slack. My marketing guy came up with that one. Basically, we take your DevOps tools and we bring them together. Oh, cool. All right. Hello. Okay, now I can wander. All right. So we take your DevOps tools, things like Datadog or even GitHub we're working on. Maybe we should talk later. And bring those together in Slack. And then we use machine learning to try to observe what you're doing and drive automation into your process without you having to actually codify the automation. If you want to learn more about what we're actually doing, I'm happy to talk later, but this isn't really about what we're doing. It's about what we've learned. Just for a little qualification, we have about 200 activities that we do in Slack, things that you can perform through Slack, and 1,500 or so predefined messages. We've used pretty much everything that Slack's put out. When they come out with something new, I'm very excited to always try it and figure out some way to force feed it into my product, sometimes to the detriment of the customers. So why I really love Slack is I've worked for 10 plus years in enterprise software, building operations tools, and we always had this dream of building like what you would call like the single pane of glass, the one place you could go and do everything. And frankly speaking, I think this Slack it gives the opportunity to provide that type of interface. It also uniquely allows you to provide an interface that works for both new and beginner users, as well as highly advanced users, because you're not stuck with a UI that has 5,000 controls and a beginning user has no idea what to do and can't really get anything done. And you're not also stuck with like for anyone who's, a longtime Mac user, like the first time they had Wi-Fi, there was like 2 options. Whereas on the Windows side, there was like a dozen, right? So there's a lot of things that you can do. And Slack, I think, gives you the opportunity to do both of them. That said, you need to think very clearly or very consciously about how you support that. When we started with Rigdy, this was an example of something that we did. Our solution is natural language based. So in this, we're taking like 4 inputs and we're running an activity. And it looks really cool. And they knocked out 1 command in 1 line. It's kind of like CLI on steroids. And that was great. But to run this, somebody had to know exactly what the command structure was. They had to know what their inputs were. And they had to know what the command was to start with. The reality is, if you're a new app or someone's new to your app, they're not going to know how to do this. Even if they are an expert user in PagerDuty, which this command happens to relate to, they're not familiar with your app. So this was an example of where, we built something that was very efficient, but wasn't good for a beginning user or a new user to your application. So some things to think about. What happens if they don't know your command? And this will be a new user. It's also the infrequent users, right? They don't know what your commands are. They don't remember them. So you got to think about how to provide help in a way that's meaningful. And that's like a no-brainer. Obviously, you should have help. So we built our help in context. So you can do things like say, hey, I need help with how to get a list of PagerDuty incidents. The nuance is, once you've got them with help, why force them to type a command, right? If you think of like, again, CLIs, you run your man page and you get a list of things you can do, and then you have to type it out. One of the unique values in Slack is, hey, we can put a button there and they can click that button and run the command instead of forcing them to type it out. So these are the types of things to think about in the context of help. One of the other things we did that was really powerful and my favorite thing is we put in something that they can send a message directly back to me or my team if they don't get enough information on help. And that's really instructive as you build an app to say, well, if our help is crappy, if they can ask us, then we can improve our help. We know that they were trying to get help on this and they asked us for more information. So really think about how can you get information back from the user to learn how to improve it. And that's a simple thing like just saying, hey, you didn't like our help or it wasn't clear, shoot me a message so I know that. Really helpful. The other thing, what happens if there's lots of inputs? I struggle with this a lot because we build integrations and sometimes some tools have like a million different properties or things that they support. Um, I'm not a big fan of slash commands. Love you guys, Slack, but not a big fan of slash commands for this reason, right? When we started and we looked into that, if you have 10, 6, 10, even 12 inputs, getting the slash command right is pretty hard. So something to think about relative to your building your own app is how much input do you need? Probably something like a dialogue or a back and forth interaction through natural language might be a better way to get a lot of data. Also, if you have a lot of optional inputs, think about how to shortcut that so they can get past the optionals if they don't need them. And then the other thing is if you have something where it's sort of a known list of inputs, set them up for success. Give them options or suggestions so they can click a button as opposed to having to type it. Again, really, really helpful for our users because I'm dyslexic, so I can't type for shit. So the buttons are like a lifesaver for me. And there's a lot of people out there, maybe not dyslexic, but just darn very good typers. So it's a really helpful thing to think about as you design your app because not everyone, even though it's a typing oriented application, they might not be great at it. So last area, just kind of what happens if they make a mistake? Again, no brainer, provide clear messages for error handling. But the added value that I'm trying to present here is if you can, give them a button to recover from that. If it means, rerun the activity or rerun the task with the correct information, as opposed to forcing them to retype all the stuff over again. Really annoying if you constantly get things wrong and have to retype it. So that's something to think about in the context of your users. Also, capture everything that failed because that's what's going to help you drive a better experience in the future. It's more important to understand what people did wrong and where you failed than it is to know what people really liked and did right because you've already got that done. You need to focus on the stuff that wasn't good. And then again, similar to the help, if you or if you can give them like if they got the name wrong on something, right? You can go pull the list of names and then say, hey, here's a list of names to run. The one you entered is wrong. Really helpful. So here's a quick example, a counter example to sort of the first one I showed, right? When we have a brand new user come in, instead they typically start with help. I need help with PagerDuty. I want to use help with PagerDuty. And so we basically gave them a click-through method to perform the exact same task that I showed you in that first slide. And this is like 99% of our users, when they deploy PagerDuty, they follow this exact flow as compared to what we thought was this really amazing command to type in the beginning. So it was about a 6-month process of, failing at getting users onboarded successfully and going through that flow. And then we came up with this and it works really well. We also learned through the course of the failures in this process, as efficient as that first typing out, 20 words or whatever it was, what we also learned, actually it's on there. So before I get to that one, build with the user in mind. Are they an advanced user or beginning user? Probably you need to start by building for the beginning user. Not because they might not be experts at the tools that you're integrating with or the use case or the workflow, but they're unfamiliar with your solution. So you really should start by building something that works for the basic user. You might miss a few people who get in there and go, this isn't really the efficiency or power that I wanted, but you've got to get them comfortable and familiar with your tool and your solution or your app before you can get them into sort of the advanced user mode. And at no point should you leave them hanging. If they have problems, if they're challenged and don't know what to do, or they run into an error, you got to give them a way to get out of it, because otherwise they're going to delete your app from their environment in a few minutes. And I can show you 100 examples of this on our side. And this is kind of relative to what I was saying. Have a path from easy to efficient, right? So start out with making it easy for people, even if it is inefficient. And this is painful for me because I'm like an efficiency evangelist. So like I want everything to be as simple as fast as possible, but really sometimes it's slow. It's better to be slow and easy than it is to be simple and efficient. And that's kind of the heart of it. Oh yeah. So anyway, on the right, what we did that was kind of cool, and we learned through all the failures as we tried to build out a flow that was easy, was nobody wants to type 12 words to do something. So we created something where they could basically build a sort of a alias, if you will, for all those old school Linux users that runs a command that had, so the 20-word command on the first slide, they can now do in a, exclamation point in 3 words. And that's how we actually got to a really useful and powerful solution for the expert users versus the beginning users, by like sort of suffering through all of the trying to get people started using our tool. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Also, a quick reminder for everyone, we're going to do questions at the end in a panel. So just save your questions, hold on to them, and at the end we'll have volunteers go around with the mics, and then you can ask your questions then. Okay. Next, we have Doug.
Cool. The dichotomy is pretty funny because I'm not going to talk about users at all. Nothing to do with users. Yeah. So I'm Doug. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Treehopper and builder of PTO Ninja. PTO Ninja is an out-of-office management solution built directly in Slack, helping HR and management better handle absences in the workplace and giving employees an interface that actually does something for them rather than just inputting time. So I know Rhea already asked, but how many people are building Slack apps? I didn't really see. A bunch of you. Cool. How many of you have an application security expert on your team? That's kind of what I thought. Hey, that's good. You got one more than I thought. So the reason why I'm up here is because when you're starting to build a business, security experts are really expensive and typically aren't the software generalists that you need to really take a product to market. So I'm just trying to give you guys some pointers on how to do this right the first time and how to pass those initial security reviews you're going to have with your first enterprise clients. So just a quick bit of background. Myself and my co-founder, PTO Ninja wasn't our first product. It actually spun off of an HR moonshot idea that was never going anywhere, but it had a lot to do with financial services. So we were having to integrate with financial institutions, and it made our security review process really, really tough because these people in finance don't mess around. And at the time, we didn't know it. We thought it was just a huge pain, but we were really lucky, and it was actually setting us up to have a really seamless launch to PTO Ninja, helping us bring on some of our biggest clients within the first 3 months of launching and set us up for a really nice growth trajectory in our first year. And whether you like it or not, security reviews are part of the sales process, which is a bit strange, but essentially if you can make these security reviews go seamlessly, your sales guys, girls, CEOs, everyone's gonna be really happy because you're gonna shorten that consumer acquisition time and consumer acquisition cost, grow faster. It's all good news. So I don't have much time. What I just want to lay out a few quick rules of thumb. And the first one I would say is stay lean. When you're collecting user data, especially if it's given to you explicitly, and you guys are working in Slack, so there's a lot of data accessible, just make sure to not store anything you do not need. Every client's going to ask you during their procurement process what you're storing. And when you tell them, they're going to follow up and say why. And since security reviews are basically just really, really expensive sniff tests, if you're not able to answer those questions right, they're gonna know right away. And it's just gonna draw these things out. They're gonna ask for more advice. And they're just trying to do a risk-benefit analysis in your app. And the more you store, the more risk you take. And that's not really good for anybody. And secondly, do your research. I don't think any of you guys are going to be building this thing completely in-house on your own server racks in your apartment. You're probably building on AWS or Azure or Google Cloud, at least I hope. And all of these places are going to have really good architecture diagrams and documents to help you get started and build something that's actually secure instead of just running one random something somewhere that's open to the internet. That's a huge problem. Just follow those. It'll be quicker. Do it before you go to production and you'll be happy. And third, have documents, have plans, like put people in charge of things, even if it's only you, and just write it down. A lot of these clients are going to ask you, what is your vulnerability response look like? And you want to be able to answer that. And you're going to want to send that on your first try. I'll talk more about that later. And lastly, iterate. They're going to ask you questions you don't know the answer to, and they're going to ask you for documents that you don't have. And like, don't sweat it. That's totally fine. Just do it now. And even if you lose that sale or land that sale, just having it for the next time, you're going to begin to aggregate a really powerful tool chest of security policies and documents. And you're going to be happy you have it, and it's just going to speed up over time. So to break that down even more, need to haves. So this is important because obviously there's going to be nice to haves after. But detailed diagrams of your cloud environment in VPC are amazing. So I know not all of you guys are engineers here, but having a diagram of how your stuff works and where it's stored and how it's run is really important. People are going to ask for it in a security review, and they're going to ask right in the beginning, can you send me a diagram of how your app works? And if you don't have that, like, that's not great. Like, do you know how your app works? It's like one of those interesting questions. But same thing with number 2, data flow diagrams, what data you touch, pulling to and from Slack, how it operates and moves through your stack, have this stuff written down. And the cool thing about 1 and 2 is that hopefully you guys are going to hire more engineers one day, and having this stuff all in one place is going to make that much easier. So it's a double win. And thirdly, I just keep saying it, documentation. They're going to ask you for random things like your threat and vulnerability management policies and procedures, your incident management and data breach policies and procedures, your GDPR compliance statement. I can go on. But when these things come up, write them down. You're actually going to be really happy you did, even if you don't ever have to institute them. Like, you still have to comply. You want to make sure you have key rotation. That's good. And if you write it down, it's going to force you to do it, and these companies are going to be really happy to see it. So following, obviously, with nice to haves. Did I skip one? Yeah, sorry, this one's important, really important. Have a full understanding of how your application works, which sounds a little bit like a catch-22, but for these security reviews, I'm sure you have really, really charismatic salespeople or like a really handsome CEO, right? And you want to send those people to the clients. But when it comes to security review, no one cares. Send the person who knows how it works, not even so they can present it properly, but just if there's questions, they can take the feedback better and actually implement it faster. And of course, nice to haves. Now, SOC 2, Privacy Shield, and third-party audits are really, really, really expensive, really expensive. For Slack apps like ours, getting those would come out to like 6 months worth of operating expenses. And since we're still just a startup, we're not really willing to take 6 months off our runway for something that's not a need to have. Now, if you do have these, everyone's going to win. Like, they're going to ask you for your certifications. You're going to say yes. You're going to send it to them, and that might just be it. But anyone that really wants the product you're making, which I hope you guys are making something that people want, they're going to be willing to work through it with you and do some sort of independent security review or something like that. And secondly, some detailed information on how your data is passed to and from Slack or to other sub-processors like AWS. I don't know if you integrate with the weather channel. Doesn't matter. Just having that stuff written down and knowing that you're working with good partners, again, for that sniff test helps a lot. And thirdly, I don't even know why I have this on here, but background checks are cool. Make sure your person hasn't been working for some Chinese security firm for the past 5 years. I don't know. But some people do ask, and some people have said no to us because we don't have that. And we've had to work around and go through other ways, and we actually just did the background check for them. So something you might want to do. And just to close it all up, Slack apps are growing really fast. There's so many more and more every day. And they're still in their infancy, though. Most people that we sell to don't even really understand how they work. In security review teams, we might be the first Slack app that they review because they're not used to paying money for a Slack app. It's very new. And going through these processes, most people just install them automatically. But we know that Slack apps are more secure. They remove countless browser vulnerabilities, and having one endpoint to interact with, and Slack's very secure, it's good, it's better. And being able to portray that's really good. But the most important thing is we find people bucket Slack apps together. Like Slack itself is a solution to all their problems. So if some of you guys out there are planning on, playing fast and loose with client data, and unfortunately you get hacked, you leak data, something goes wrong, a disgruntled employee takes it and posts it on Facebook, it's gonna look bad for all of us. And I know Slack puts a lot of work into making us all look good. So this is just like a really convoluted way of saying, don't be that guy. This stuff is important. And if you just do it right in the beginning, you're gonna save yourself a huge headache. So that's it. Wanted to make it quick. I know security review isn't the most sexy thing to talk about on something fun like this, but if some of you guys want to talk about it more, happy to provide templates of like the documents that we typically provide when people ask. I also have some diagrams of our architecture if you want to look at that and just how to get yourself set up for success as quickly as possible. So come find me after. I'm happy to talk. I'd love to hear what you guys are building too. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That's really true. A lot of people think about the fun part of building and not really like the housekeeping that comes with it. So next we have David.
Hi everyone, my name is David. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how to build an app for our app directory. I'm David. I'm one of the partner engineers here at Slack. So I'm helping our partners and people from the app directory to build apps for the app directory. My username on most of social platforms is Pixenmeister. So if you happen to put it right into Google, you should find my social accounts or some of my family members. So what is the app directory? The app directory is basically our listing directory for all apps which can be installed by any workspace on Slack. So it's kind of like an app store, but for Slack apps. And we have thousands of our apps in our app directory, and around 90% of our paid customers are actively using apps every week. And we do have a lot of different areas and different tools which already integrates into Slack and which are public in our app directory. So we have different areas from sales, developer tools, communication, and many other areas as well. This is all great and nice, but usually when you start off building an app, you usually have the questions, how do we even start? What even should I build? What are like a good workflow for a Slack app? What works well in the context of Slack? What doesn't work well in the context of Slack? And usually when we talk to partners and talk to people who are building the first app, we're gonna recommend them to deeply look in their product and how they are using their product themselves. So this can be quite easy in just like observing yourself. What are like the action points where you have to leave your product and talk to other people? Doesn't matter if it's through email, Slack, or just chatting people. And what are the actions point where you're like in Slack or we're talking to someone and then need to take an action in your product? So what are like these kind of action points where you have to switch context between communicating with people and performing actions within your product? And if we talk about these actions, we usually differentiate between two kinds of actions: app-initiated actions and user-initiated actions. So app-initiated actions are basically actions which are triggered from your app to Slack. So this could be some kind of notification. This can be something which is triggered through any action in your product and notifies someone else in Slack. And the other one is user-initiated action. So this can happen, these actions can be triggered when people are reading conversations and they're being remembered that they have to take an action item from that. That can be having an active conversation or also getting a notification from a different app within Slack. So these are all kind of actions which are triggered by the user initiating them. And if you're in Slack, you can trigger these user-initiated actions from a couple of different entry points. So one thing we have, which we call message actions, is a way to initiate an action from an existing message. You can see it on the left. So every time when you hover over an existing message in Slack, you see this little three-dotted menu, and we create a possibility for apps to add a specific action for this one. So the first one, for example, is Jira. So this can kick off a workflow to create a Jira ticket from this existing message. The second one we have is called a slash command. This is like kind of a global action command, which is available through our message composer. Another thing we have is called the app home. So this is basically the direct message to your app. You can find this section over here. So beneath your direct messages, you have a section called apps. And this is also where your app shows up and where a user can start off an action or start communicating with your app. Shane later is going to talk a little bit deeper about the app home. But this is also like one entry point where you can kick off action with your app. And another one is an app mention. So basically, it works the same as mentioning a user. You can also mention apps within Slack. And if a user on Slack mentions your app, it's very likely that you want to interact with your app or start off or kick off an action. And a very small yet very powerful feature is something we call app unfurls. And this is basically a way for your app to listen to specific links posted to Slack. So for example, you are salesforce.com and the workspace has the Salesforce app installed and the user posts a Salesforce link. Then Slack recognizes this Salesforce link. It recognizes that it's attached to your app and it sends an event to your app and you have the opportunity to provide some more information. So this way, the user don't have to follow this link and getting like this high detail information directly within Slack, getting context of what is this link about, what this other user posted in Slack. And we also encourage you to build for interactivity. Naturally, Slack is a conversational interface, so it's about chatting with people and collaborating with people, but Slack also provides a couple of interactive elements to make these interactions more interactive for end users. We have a couple of different interactive message elements, which are buttons and menus, which you can use. And we also have a way to build forms in Slack, which we call dialogues. So this can be used to basically collect additional information from users directly within Slack. Something we just recently launched in February is our new UI framework, which is called BlockKit. And as of today, we have 5 blocks which you can use to design messages. So we have display blocks called the section block, which can be used for text. We have image blocks, which can be used to display images in a message. We have the context block, which are blocks to basically display contextual information or additional information or secondary information in a message. We have the divider block. It's a little bit too small to see, but it's basically a thin gray line which divides content within a Slack message. And we have the actions block. In the actions block, we have a couple of different action elements, for example, buttons, which can be used within messages. We have static select menus. We have dynamic select menus, which are pre-populated, for example, with all existing users of this workspace or existing channels of this workspace. And we also have something called a date picker, which makes it easier for user to pick a date right within the UI of Slack. And we also have a BlockKit builder, which is like a tool to help you design and prototype your messages and figure out how they're going to look like in Slack. And it also presents you the JSON payload, which you can directly use in your app's code to send out these messages you've just recently designed. So it makes it also easy to help designers work together with developers and vice versa. Once you figure out the workflows and you're ready to publish your app, you can basically submit your app to our app directory. And before that, we have a couple of things we need you to do on your side. It's called our app directory submission checklist. So these are things you should go through before submitting your app to our app directory. The first thing is you need to enable distribution, which means you need to make it possible that other workspaces can install your app. You need to test your app, that it works, remove all hard-coded API tokens from your code base so people can actually install your app and the app is working on new workspaces as well. You should also review your permission scopes. So during the install process, you ask for a different set of permissions from the user who is installing this app in a workspace. And you should only request the permissions and the scopes you actually need your app to work. So don't request any additional scopes you might going to use in the future. just request the ones you use right now. You can update your app later on. You can request additional scopes later on if you update your app and make real use of these permissions. Also review your user experience. We have a couple of really good best practices and guides how to build great experiences on Slack. They can be all found on our API doc section. So make sure you review your user experience. In general, make sure you build for interactivity. Make sure you have a good and solid onboarding. Provide help actions where needed. And don't spam users. No one likes spammy apps. And also prepare your app directory listing. So make sure you have all your assets ready, like screenshots from your app, ideally like a screencast where you give an example how this app looks like within Slack, what does it do, a powerful description, and also prepare a page on your site which walks the user through installing the app, how-tos, FAQs, and also add an Add to Slack button so people can, when they land on your site, directly install the app from your website. And also make sure your customer support is prepared. So especially if you're working in a bigger company, make sure your customer support is ready to answer questions around your app, your Slack app. That's it. This is the quick overview, how to build an app for the app directory. If you have any more questions, I'm going to take it later, but I'm also going to be around after the presentations. And I really hope you appreciate the collection of emojis because it took me at last 30 minutes to get like all the emojis right for this thing. Thank you very much, and I will give it up to Shane.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Good news is David and I's talk flow really well together, and we didn't even plan it, which is really convenient. I'm going to be talking about best practices for app discovery. So this is after your app is already listed in the directory, or you're developing an app internally, and you want your app to be discovered by people inside of your company. We're going to focus on things inside and outside of Slack. And my name is Shane. I'm on the developer relations team here at Slack. My team is responsible for things like developer education and building the tools that developers can use for the platform. Has anyone heard of Bolt by chance? Not very many, which hurts my heart. But if any of you are JavaScript or TypeScript developers, check it out. It's a new framework we launched at Frontiers this last year, and it makes it easy to start building Slack apps quickly. So if you haven't built a Slack app, Bolt is a great way to get started. And I'm based here in the San Francisco office. Like, literally, if you go through this floor right now, you'll be near my desk. So yeah, I'll be talking about discovering apps inside and outside of Slack. So when we think of features inside of Slack that you can utilize to help users discover and grow usage inside of an organization, as well as what you can be doing before you even get a user inside of Slack. So I'm going to start by saying something that may seem very, very obvious, which is consider your user at every step of the way. When you're initially planning your application, when you're planning the UX patterns that you have in your application, be thinking about your user. Put yourself in your customer's shoes. If you're a Slack app, they're going to be using Slack already, which is where work happens. So they're going to be in a context where they're already working in a workspace with their peers. How can you improve that experience of their work? And how can you make them more productive? And when you start to consider certain things about your audience, think about the role they have, whether they're technical or less technical users, their background, what industry they're in, and what other apps they may be using, and look at those apps. And then when you start to consider your user, we're going to take that in the context of surface areas. Here are a couple surface areas that we're going to touch on. The first is the app directory listing, which is a listing for all public apps in our app directory. The next is the app landing page, which is controlled by you as a developer. It's your website, essentially. And then also inside of Slack, which we'll touch on in a bit. So let's start with the directory listing. When we look at this, it should be communicating the value of your app to your customers. It should be framed by the problem that your app is solving. So if I was developing something like a stand-up app, I would talk about how it's going to improve communication and consolidate my team updates. Framing it like a problem makes it so that if your app is small or maybe the name isn't well known, that you can have solution-oriented apps. So if people are searching for a problem rather than your specific app, they'll stumble upon it. And then you should talk about how to improve productivity or actually deliver on the value that you're promising them. How is your app going to help deliver productivity to their team and power up their workspace? And then you should pivot to actually talking about how to get started. So before they even install your app, you should say what happens after. How are they going to interact with your app for the first time? And what's going to happen after they hit that big green install button? And then, of course, you should offer help. At every part of the experience, you should start building a relationship with your customers and users. Make them aware that there's help at every step of the way and start to really build that relationship. Tell them that there's humans behind the app that you're building. And then, of course, as David said, help with visuals. You should add things like screenshots and video that show people how your app is working inside of Slack and reinforces that value that you're promising inside your listing. Next, let's pivot to the landing page, which has a lot of the same core values as this app directory listing, except you as a developer control it and you have more surface area to work with. It should still be talking about the value of your app, what your app does, how it works, how people can install it, where they can get support, all of these things that are essential to your everyday users and customers. You should also have, which is sad, it's a little small here, the Add to Slack button front and center, really visible on the page. You want to make it really easier for people to install your app, obviously, if that's how they're going to get started using your service. Also, with that, you want to include usage or install instructions that tell them, again, what's going to happen after they install the app. If they're installing the app, how are they going to initiate the first action with your app? How do they start that communication process or authenticate with your service? And if you do have authentication with your service, it's fine to put this Add to Slack button behind like your auth or something like that. Just make sure that these instructions are still public so that people can still find out how to actually install the app and where exactly to go in the process. And then another really important step is making the customer feel like they are more productive and that you're adding value to the workspace. So a big part of this is giving them support. Things like user guides, tutorials, and FAQs go a really long way to giving them instant support so they can get back to the work that they were doing. But you also, of course, need to provide an email or some other way to contact them or contact you or your support team so that it can actually reach a human. Like things like bugs, or maybe they have feature requests, or maybe they just want to communicate with a real person. And that needs to be clear and accessible to them. So let's pivot a little bit more and talk about what happens inside of Slack. So this screenshot will look familiar because you've seen it. This is the same as the app directory listing. We reuse the content for public apps from the app directory listing inside of this About tab. And so when you're designing the copy for that, you want to think of not only the installing user as the customer, but also people that are going to come across your app having very little context, like people that will just click on your app inside of Slack, and it's their first time ever seeing that app, not knowing the value that your app is supposed to provide them, or not knowing how you're going to provide that. So really keep that in mind and design for all experiences when you're writing this copy, and not just like admins or people you expect to install it. And then, of course, another really important piece on the app directory listing when it's ported over to Slack is this getting started, because you know the app is installed, but as a user that doesn't have the context of the installer, I don't know how to get started. So it's really important to provide this, whether you say hello to the app in the DM or use a / command or something like that, you need to be aware of how to use the app. Next is app suggestions, which is also for public apps. To implement this, you enable it on the app management page, but you also add some metadata to your actual landing page or whatever service that your app is associated with. And this is really good for apps that have existing services or web applications that exist. And what happens is when a user is already using your web service and they post a link inside of Slack, you can actually unfurl that and tell them we actually have a Slack app. You can install that now so that they're connecting their workflows into tools that they're already using, which makes your app more sticky because it becomes even more essential for their everyday uses. And then the app home, which David mentioned. So as he said, the app home is when you open the DM with the app. And we launched a new events API event, which is called the app home opened event. And the app home opened event is triggered every time a user opens that app home. And it indicates that a user is at least interested in your app. We have a really bad practice that some developers will do, which is DM every user when the app is installed, which may seem like a great way to get initial traction, but it causes a lot of frustration, especially among admins, people that don't have context into why the app was installed. When we're thinking about this on bigger teams, when it's just like DMing 400 people or 4,000, it just proves frustrating. So app home opened indicates that they actually want to interact with your app and hear from your app. And so if it's their first time opening your app home, send them a welcome message. And a welcome message is just saying what your app is, what value it provides, and a clear call to action. So if they need to authenticate with your third-party service, tell them that and give them a button that goes out to your authentication portal. Or if you need to invite the app to a channel, what you can do is provide a select menu that has a list of channels that you can invite them to. So it makes it easy to actually take that action you want them to and to start actually seeing the value and power that your app provides them. But just implementing this first onboarding experience we managed the Outlook calendar app on the Slack platform. And after implementing this, we saw a 7x growth in activations, so authentications with the Outlook service, from 9% of users that were opening the home of the app actually authenticating to I have this number because I forget it, 70%, which is a huge margin. And it shows that when you're listening to user intent and you react to that user intent and you provide them the resources they need, that they're going to act and try to use your app to the best abilities. You just have to tell them how. We have other ways that you can use this event past just the onboarding experience, though. If you release major new functionality, send them usage instructions. So if I have a task app and I release message actions inside of Slack, the next time someone opens the app home space, I can say hey, we just added this feature, which is gonna make your workflow so much better. Here's how to use it. Here's how it's gonna help, and include screenshots or any support material that it might need. Another thing that I've seen recently is sending them randomized tips on using your app better. So after the initial onboarding, maybe once a month or so, you can just send them, when they open your app home, a tip on how to actually use your app better, more deep functionality that your app has to offer that they may have not run into when they're initially using it. Or if they've installed your app, but they haven't taken any action in a couple of days, you can send them a follow-up and reiterate your value and make sure you put support front and center in case one reason is that they didn't know what to do next, or that they were confused by the instructions, or they just got stuck. Here's an example of someone implementing the app home opened event. This is an app called Help, which is on our app directory. And they actually implemented two different workflows. The top one is for users, and the bottom one is for agents. And users are just standard users. Agents, they're a ticketing app for context. Agents can manage and respond to tickets inside of Slack. So they customize the onboarding experience for these two different ones. On the first one, when someone opens the app home opened, they say the value of their app, say how to get started using it, and then anticipating the intent of that user, has a prompt to open a ticket, which is a pretty standard use case. But on the bottom, you can see the agent, which is going to have to go into deeper functionality and going to have to access things like managing tickets or assigning tickets or seeing their open tickets. So they customize that onboarding experience for that. And they make that app home open message different for those two different types of users. Another thing you should always be doing is offering help. Obviously, you want your users to succeed. They want to succeed using your app, or else they would not have installed it. Users may need help for a variety of reasons. They want to learn more. Your app isn't working as they expected. They have a feature request, or they really just want to access the deepest functionality you have to offer. But regardless, you need to respond. So if you have a slash command, you should tell them how to use that command when they type help after it. Tell them basic usage instructions and where they can go for more help. If someone messages help to your app, tell them how to use your app, reiterate what you told them during your onboarding process or anything else, and tell them where to go to get more help. Here's an example of a bad and good help message. The left one is doodle, which is on the app directory. Here you can see that they provide basic usage instructions. They're a polling app, so they tell you how to start a poll, how to manage polls, and how to sign up for their service. But they also have this clear call to action to contact the support team. And so they just include that email right there, which is a small detail, but it allows people to reach out to them directly. And then under that, they provide something even that I find pretty cool, which is that they embed a video inside of their message, which just walks through basic usage of their app. So it's answering a lot of the FAQ questions that their support team gets, and just directly upfront answering those with an inline video. On the right-hand side, this is a fake app. It's not real, but it's just TaskBot. And I made it to be bad, but it's just like basically saying the value. It says what the command is, but it really doesn't give any real usage instructions. It doesn't give anywhere to go for help. It's not very helpful if you're trying to figure out how to use this app. And it's likely going to lead to abandonment of the app and eventually uninstallation. So not a great transition, but that's the end of that section. I wanted to leave you with some resources and next steps. The first one is the Start Hub, which is a newly launched portion of our API site. This goes over everything from conceptualizing what an app can do on Slack to actually designing the user experience of an app and giving you resources to start building that app, so linking you out to our developer tools and documentation. The next one is templates, which is in the block kit builder that David showed. And templates give you a place to get started. So if you're implementing the app home opened event or an onboarding experience, it has onboarding templates where you can start from to offer a good onboarding experience for your app. But it also has things like search results, polling, notifications, best practices that were put together by our designers. And then I have this app updates form, which I didn't know how to display in this slide deck. It's a bit.ly form, but if you have a public app in our directory and you update your app, this is managed by our app directory team. And if you send them like what new features you did, what new functionality on the platform you took advantage of, they monitor that and respond to that and try to get those apps featured and engage with those developers. So if you have a public app, definitely I'm sure these slides will go out after the meetup, but note that down and reach out when you update your app. Cool. I think I'm going to pass it off to Rhea, or we'll do the panel or something like that. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay, ready for
You can do whatever you want.
All right.
we just need to move this guy out of his stage.
Does this roll? There you go.
Are you going over there?
I'm going over here.
You're behind the curtain.
Rotate around. Oh, he's.
It's part of it. Okay, cool. So I'm sure you guys have questions about everything that you've heard. So if you have any specific questions, we have two volunteers around. Raise your hand. Just look for the nearest one and just flag them down, and then tell us a little bit about yourself and ask your question. That too. Okay.
I'll go first. So, question. My name's Vlad. Question to the last guy that went up. Can you share any stats on like the directory installs and how many people actually go and install directly from the search? How many install from like external search? Any numbers you can share?
I would love to provide you with numbers. Unfortunately, I don't have them off of the top of my head, and I don't know what I'm allowed to share, so I'm a little scared to. But if you reach out to our support team and like ask for the app directory team, they'll provide you with all the stats that they can.
Um, I'm gonna rain on your parade, but we keep stats because we have a link in there. We've had this many installs from the Slack app directory, but most people are coming from they click on the, you can install directly from the directory, but they're clicking on the app, going to our website to get more information and then installing. So we were at first really surprised when we saw that. Well, why is no one downloading from here? Because they really wanted more information than you kind of get on the listings. So to his point about make sure the second page, your page, has like the hook that's really going to drive them to install, because they're probably going to want a little more information, especially if it's like ours is an enterprise app. So obviously they're not going to, it's not like consumer based. So just something to keep in mind.
I can speak to that too, actually. So we've done like zero marketing effort on Toast and like in terms of like putting like Google ads or anything out there. Mostly it's like me talking to my friends and then them telling their friends. But then we've definitely seen an increase in installs just from people finding out. Like they're like typing in, to your point, Shane, just like typing in like, okay, GitHub pull requests, then they'll find Toast from that. So it's really important to get your short description right so that they can quickly get to that through the search. And then, so 100% of our installs, aside from like recommendations, are coming from Slack.
I have the other mic. My name's Encore. I work at Slack, and I've built nothing. No, helped build Bolt with Shane, and you guys should all check it out. My question is actually for Shane, which is, you mentioned people should use the app home opened event when users land on an app home. What is app home?
The app home is conceptually what David pointed out. The app home is the space, basically the DM with your app. So when you click on the app in the left-hand sidebar, you open the app home of the app. And that's associated with a bot user if your app has it. It'll have access to an app home. And that's a great place to send notifications from your app or interact with the app, whether it's asking for help or anything else that you do with your application. As well as like the app home opened event itself. It's using the events API, which allows you to listen to events happening in the workspace, as opposed to the web API, which is more like querying for information like lists of users or posting messages to Slack.
If I understand correctly, there is going to be a workshop for App Home Opened at Spec. So go to Spec. I'm going to be running that workshop alongside Fletcher from Help, which was also on your slides.
Didn't know that, but go check it out.
Come to Spec.
Hi, I'm Jesse. I was just curious, one of the things you showed, Shane, regarding the app home open was responding to different users who had maybe different roles or permissions with different messages. I was interested in if that was something that was kind of more theoretical, like application specific, you imagine they configure that ahead of time, or if there's any kind of recommended way that you might know particular users have different roles right off the bat.
Help is like a specific example because they have an external service, so they already have an association with the users. They have a really great blog post on our platform blog that's probably worth reading through just to see how they did it. They did it really well. It's one of the first times I've seen like a really cool onboarding flow that does that user association stuff. But there's not a lot you can just do with the raw Slack information that you can associate that user. You'll have to like get that yourself, whether it's the app inside of Slack or like on your third-party service.
Thank you.
I got a mic. Too late. Question for Doug. I'm wondering how much time on average does it take you to close an big enterprise customer that has been going through the security review? what's the number one most essential thing that drives yes in this process? And yeah, I would say those are my questions.
Cool. Sasan? Cool. Are you talking specifically about the security aspect?
Yes, yeah. So what's happening? Let's say you have a big customer coming from the financial industry, and they are very interested in the app, and then they find out that okay, you are a small developer, and maybe don't check all the boxes. How do you convince them that you are in fact secure, except you are a small developer? And then second of all, how long it takes for this process, maybe to give some more context, I'm getting some inbound interest from big financial institutions on Wall Street, and sometimes it takes 2 months for them to get back to me. I get worried that it's taking too long, and I'm wondering how proactive I should be in this process, whether if it's taking 2 months, is it taking too long, or is it actually quite on point? That sort of stuff.
I'll try and stay on the security aspect because we could talk forever about enterprise sales, and I'm a CTO. I don't mess with that stuff. I try and stay away if I can.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at, because
Perfect.
that's the main sticking point for us.
Cool. So obviously, depending on what industry you're selling into, it's going to be very different regulations on what they are allowed to and not allowed to integrate with. So you said how long? That's all over the place. As I was saying in my slides, like if you have everything ready right in the beginning and ready to go, they're going to put you in touch with someone from security during the procurement. And if you just dump all the files that they're looking for and have all the stuff ready, it can be as quick as a week. If they're not responding to you, it probably hasn't even gotten to security yet, because there's going to be some product champion within that company that needs to be driving the whole thing. So your job is to make sure that they get everything to security immediately. And security teams on average move, compared to the purchaser, way faster. So that's not where you're going to get hung up for the long term. So the typical process is either inbound or outbound. We get a lead, we get buy-in from at least one of the decision makers, and they say this is good enough to review. Let's get our security team on board. And typically it's a 30-minute phone call with me and someone in IT or application security. Like some of the bigger firms will have a couple people. They want to see, they just have very canned questions, like do you encrypt your data at rest? Stuff that you can do by checking boxes in AWS. You get through that, you share some documents, and they say we'll get back to you, and it's usually about a week. I have not sold into a Wall Street firm yet. Typically, we're dealing with tech companies, which is awesome.
Okay.
But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was perfect. And your presentation was great too, so thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks.
I have a more technical question, probably for just the API team or something. We have an app which mostly works within Slack, but sometimes we direct our users into our web app. And at this transition, we need to authenticate a user, and we use sign in with Slack button. But we'll lose quite a lot of people at this step because most of them are authenticated in their Slack app, but not authenticated in the browser. And they just don't remember the workspace name, don't remember the password and anything. And I'm just curious, first, is it just us or a lot of people complain about that? And are there any good ideas on how to work around this?
I guess I'm going to talk to that. First of all, what we usually recommend when it comes to authentication, we have two ways of how to kind of match your users from your service to Slack. One way is to have them go through the authentication within Slack. So basically, once they authenticate your Slack app, and they're like basically logged in into your service, you match the user on your side and create like this matching. And the second one is you can basically request all the users of this workspace and try to match the email addresses automatically from users who've signed up to your service to users of within Slack. We usually recommend like the first way because this is like really the best approach to make sure that these are the right users who belong to each other. While the second way is not really like a solid way to match the users, because sometimes users use different email addresses to sign up for your service than for signing up to Slack. That makes sense.
I'll also add on that a couple of things that I've seen done really well with that process is one, it is a big drop off point for a lot of apps, like straight up. But also, when they authenticate, you should probably DM that user and let them know the authentication was successful. Draw them back into Slack so that they can pick up where they left off. And if you need to onboard them further on your app, that gives you the show. Another thing is just like smooth that onboarding process as much as you can. Like anywhere where you can create that connection to your service from Slack, like it's going to be a drop-off point regardless, but there are small changes you can make to your onboarding flow on your website, but also to your Slack app that can probably smooth that experience a little bit.
Yeah. Another entry point for the authentication process for users within Slack can also be the app home. So once a user opens your app home in Slack and you know this user, you don't know this user, you know he's not connected to or not matched with any user in your account, you can basically proactively send them a message to authenticate against your service, and then you can create the match on your side from your user to the Slack user.
And just to add really quick, I know someone else talked about having an identity outside of Slack. I think that was you. Matching an identity to an identity outside of Slack is single-handedly one of the most challenging things you're going to have to do, specifically because people do use different emails, or they change their email, or their startup. So they're like Mike at, and then they go to M dot last name at. It's going to happen all the time. If you nail that, you're going to be
So if possible, I guess my question would be to every panelist. If you could, what would be the number one feature that Slack doesn't have today that you would want to see tomorrow?
Ooh, can I go first? So over the weekend or last Friday, one of our largest customers, the person who installed our app left the company. And we're an incident management solution. So when there's problems and they try to use our app and it doesn't work, they're not very happy because they have an incident with their incident management solution. So I was back and forth with support over the weekend, but more or less, not automatically deleting our app when the person who installed it leaves would be great from an enterprise app perspective.
You should try workspace tokens.
Yeah.
That was a joke. Those don't exist anymore. I'm just having trouble because I have to pick one. Can I pick two? Is that all right? Cool. First one, can I update a dialogue after they make an entry? That would be so cool. I know they were given hints of it at the conference, but basically if there's one drop down in a dialogue and they make a selection, that very likely is gonna adjust what I want to ask afterwards. And as of right now, you have to give them the entire payload when they open the dialogue, and you don't get anything back until they hit submit. So if they're like, do you want to do this or this? And they choose, and you can't really follow up on anything depending on the first answer. That's, I think, coming. No, this guy. And secondly, also back to the authentication with Slack that you were talking about. When we ask for a second permission, so if we want to ask for additional token, and they go back into the app, people have installed into the wrong workspace. So now we're holding partial tokens for someone in two separate workspaces. So if I could just say, I can give them a link or in that permissions ask, give them the workspace ID or the team ID, that would be selected at the top. So I'm not like getting random team ID events that I've never seen before, no entry of, and can't uninstall because I don't have the tokens for them because I wasn't listening. Great. This felt good to say in front of an audience, by the way. This is helpful.
I've got one more too. Since you said two, I want to give one more. Controlling which user in Slack can use our app. On the enterprise level, a huge feature, right? I deployed an app and I want my team to play around with it before they let release it to the wild. We got two Fortune 100 companies that shot us down because we couldn't restrict it down. And I think that's something that as apps become more prevalent in enterprise is going to be a big deal.
Also back to the identity outside of Slack. So we did it with email matching.
I think for me, because at Toast we deal with a lot of notifications in general, like GitHub webhooks come left and right, and like usually like 11 for the same event. So for us, like we like to be able to, we already dedupe so much for like each one single event that is triggered. We try to make sure, okay, we only send one notification, but still several events can happen at the same time that the user wants to know about. So on the like not spamming the user side, we want to be able to send silently. So like a lot of things don't need to be seen by the whole team, but we want to DM the user, but then like be able to DM them without being like, hey,
Don't ping.
yeah, just like silently send. That would be nice.
I feel like we should follow up by saying something we love about Slack, just to like
Can we do
balance
that?
it out.
I can start off with what I love. When we were getting approved for the app marketplace, so like that was one of the topic that we talked about tonight. Um, it was like the first time, like we had like two companies that we were in private beta with, and that was like pretty like scary to just go right into the app marketplace and kind of opening up for everyone. And that process was so seamless. We got back a response like within the day every single time, and with very detailed checklist of like what you need to do to be approved. So that process is pretty pain free. If you're thinking about whether you want to release your app into the wild, I would say like definitely give it a go if you want to have strangers using your app. It's definitely a very easy process, and like you can ask questions. Like I've asked questions through the email support, like if I'm featured right now, if I like change my short description, does that change my status in the featured? And like I get back responses pretty immediately.
Yeah, I second that. The support team is amazing. I don't know if their names are real, but it's like an Aubrey and a Marcelo. Are those people real?
Love Marcelo.
Okay, cool. Yeah, they all are awesome.
I'm a Marcelo fan.
Yeah, very familiar.
Uh, I have a quick question too. Do you guys have any tips or tricks about best setting up customer engagement or any analytics and metrics around any of your application and bot behavior?
Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of analytics tools right now. If you are a public app, you can email like the support team and they can provide some really basic analytics about the actual directory listing. Um, Other than that, there's ways to use events like the app home open to see how many people are opening like the DM space with your app, like tracking that kind of stuff. Um, do you know of any? There's honestly not a lot right now. It's something that we know is like a gap for especially public apps that we need to focus on.
Yeah, so we don't have any internal tools to provide you any analytics or metrics at this point, which means you basically need to either track it on your side or use any third-party service for all the incoming actions and events you receive on your side. So there are a couple of tools which are like specialized into like apps for messaging applications, but you can also use basically any analytics tool like Google Analytics, Mixpanel, whatever is out there.
I mentioned this earlier, and I'm just going to repeat it because I had some heartburn when I saw a couple of your screenshots. You probably have your own Slack workspace, and they have a workspace. So it's really easy, since you have a Slack app, to have them send a message, and then have your bot send a message to your workspace, and then send a message from your workspace through the bot back to their workspace. So you can have real-time communication with your customers in Slack through the two workspaces. And I got to tell you, it's the most amazing thing. When you put an email address, hey, email support, when they're already in a chat tool, it's like, why don't we go back to the Stone Age here and send an email to support? So strongly suggest you experiment with that if you feel like your customers need support, rather than sending them to an email address.
I thought I was the only one that figured that out.
Let's wrap up and then just have some time for networking. And you've seen all of these amazing speakers now, and you know who we are. So just, if you have another question you want to ask offline, here we are. And any other things, you can just go to the Slack community and let us know. And also, please give us feedback, like what you liked about this session, what you want to see in future sessions, and then we'll take it from there. Oh, before you head out, if you plan on going to spec, we do have the code. How do we get that back on the screen? Oh, we can email it out. So thank you, everyone.